Our mock draft trade might be dead. The Buddy Hield for Eric Bledsoe swap in picks 9 and 10. That didn't come to fruition. But there have been rumors and conversations between the Sacramento Kings and New Orleans Pelicans still involving Buddy Hield and a sign and trade for Josh Hart. Joining me here on the Locked On Kings podcast once again, it's Jake Madison from the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Jake, it's a bummer that our trade didn't go through. It seems like the Pelicans have been still plenty active. They did find a trade partner to take both Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe off your hands, but still Buddy Hield is out there potentially for the Pelicans to end up with.
Yeah, look, they want to add some more shooting, though. They added Devontae Graham, which certainly helps that. You lose Lonzo Ball, who, depending on what you think about him, was at least a shooter. So they want to put more of that around Zion and Brandon Ingram. And when you look at kind of the young roster and the guards they have here, there's no real need for a guy like Josh Hart actually right now. And you probably don't want him getting minutes over some of these other guys. So a sign and trade where they ship him out and get someone that kind of fits what they're doing a little bit more, makes some sense to me. And that's why it's not surprising to hear that these two teams have talked.
I'm not going to lie to you. I've looked, at least from my perspective, at the New Orleans Pelicans offseason, and I've been not just unimpressed, I've been surprised by how overall quiet it's been. From my perspective, this Pelicans team is ready to make a move right now, is trying to compete right now with Zion, and of course, the Sacramento Kings are trying to do the same in their own right with De'Aaron Fox, but I expected more from the New Orleans Pelicans. Can you fill us in with the New Orleans perspective of what's going on? Is there disappointment? Are you happy with what the Pelicans are doing right now? Is there desperation? What's going on in New Orleans?
Yeah, look, first and foremost, they're better, I think, than they were last year. I think Valanciunas is a slight upgrade, slight, not huge upgrade over Steven Adams. Eric Bledsoe was so bad for this team last year that it's kind of addition by subtraction by getting him out of there. I thought Lonzo Ball was there's limitations to him as an NBA player and didn't quite fit what New Orleans was doing. And he's a tough player to build around. So while they lose him, it's not the end of the world. You bring in a guy like Devontae Graham, who can at least drive, who's an excellent shooter. So you get that spacing there. Trey Murphy has looked good in summer league as a guy that can step in, shoot threes. So I think they're better, and they're banking on a lot of internal growth from a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's going to be probably a starter in the backcourt. Jackson Hayes, when maybe some of the legal and police issues that he's going through right now get worked out, and I expect them to, should be taking a step forward. He started to look good in the second half of last season. So when you look at it like that, they're better than they were last season. But are they that much better? And they were very clearly trying to prime themselves for a run at a guy like Chris Paul. They reportedly made him a 3-year, $100 million deal offer. They went after a guy like Kyle Lowry. They swung and missed on all of those. They used up some of the draft capital that they've gotten in the Drew Holiday deals and the Anthony Davis trades to offload bad contracts in Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe that they used draft capital to acquire. So when you kind of put that all in perspective there, it's not a great offseason. Yes, they're better, but it's incrementally so. And for a team that's looking to make a bigger leap than just get into the play-in tournament, which would be an improvement over last year, that's probably not good enough. That's kind of where they stand right now. And so, yes, they're better, but it still makes it feel like this season was a disappointment.
Josh Hart is an intriguing potential player for the Sacramento Kings. A lot of what he does from that shooting guard position, especially when it comes to being a strong rebounding guard, I know is enticing to fans here in Sacramento. I know is enticing potentially even to the Kings. But the Kings are very loaded in their backcourt, so much so that they just had to move on from DeLon Wright and brought back Tristan Thompson as part of the deal. I personally feel like they could have gotten more for DeLon Wright. He was very good for the Kings in his limited time last season. But I mean, that trade is done with, trying to open up space for Davion Mitchell, who they just drafted. Of course, Buddy Hield is still here. He would allegedly be involved in this deal. You got De'Aaron Fox, you got Tyrese Halliburton. There's just a lot of guards on this team already. And this team still lacks wing depth. So it's a little confusing as to why the Kings potentially would be targeting Josh Hart. Before we dive into the complexities of what would have to happen in order for this sign and trade to go down, if you wouldn't mind giving, just based off of what you've seen out of Hart, an idea, the pros and cons of what you feel he would bring a team in the situation of the Kings.
Yeah, look, it's definitely a weird spot for the Kings to be in with kind of a glut of guards there, I think. But the good news is the past 2 years in New Orleans, he's played more on the wing than he has in the backcourt. They've used him almost exclusively as a small forward and at that three position, which again, there's positionless basketball and all of that. So that doesn't necessarily mean a ton, but they've definitely used him more in that area on the wing than they have in the backcourt as a two guard. So I think that kind of helps with some of that. And he gives you, a lot of things that you're going to love. Like he's a guy that fans absolutely love because he's giving his all out there on the court. He grabs a lot of rebounds that he has no business getting because he just times it well and he out hustles every other player out there. He's dives for loose balls. He's an above average, but not great defender, particularly on the wing. He's better against two guards there. So he does kind of all of that like dirty work that you want to have a guy that accomplishes all of that on the team. And then when people notice it, it's like, hell yeah, just give me a guy that like fights hard every single night, right? Like that can sometimes be a very important quality. And he has all of that. But his offensive game is kind of limited. And I think that's where you really start to see some holes in it. And that's one of the reasons why I think New Orleans isn't looking to necessarily bring him back. Last season, he shot 32.6% from three. The year before that was 34%. Basically, after his rookie year, where he shot close to 40%, he hasn't been particularly great from three, and that's a little bit disappointing. He's under 34% for his career here in New Orleans. It was a guy that if you're going to have someone drive and kick to him, I don't know if he's going to make that shot. And it got into his head so much, particularly late in this past season. He was passing up open 3-point looks because he was just not confident in taking, say, those corner threes. At that point, you've got to take them and you've got to start making them if you really want to earn a big contract or start to have a future in the league, despite all of those other nice things that you do. If you can't make threes and that's your primary job because he doesn't drive, he's not like an interior scorer or anything like that, it just leaves him kind of limited, and you could really see it start to get to him mentally this past year. And look, Pels need more shooters. That's why we'd be talking about a Buddy Hield for Josh Hart swap, where you're getting the shooter, and if he could hit shots, I don't think they'd be looking to trade him. So that's really the biggest limitation from him in terms of on-court stuff. Off-court also, dude's just kind of a fun player to have. He's streaming, he does podcasts, like just like a cool dude that's like a guy that relates to fans really well, and that's never a bad thing either.
So thinking of how Josh Hart would work in Sacramento, immediately I think, okay, if he were to be on this roster and replace Buddy Hield, he would compete with Terrence Davis more than likely for backup 2/backup 3 minutes. And I might even work Mo Harkless into there, although some think Mo Harkless is going to be a backup 3/4, which does make sense. But with the abundance of bigs on this roster, with Marvin Bagley still on this roster, who the hell knows what the Kings are really going to do at the 4 spot. So it makes the most sense in my mind that Josh Hart and Terrence Davis would be competing for those backup 2-3 minutes. Terrence Davis, more known for his scoring. Sounds like Josh Hart, capable of spacing the floor, but more known for his defense and his rebounding. So let me ask you how Hart fared defending standard backup NBA threes. Was that a position that he was comfortable in? Because the Kings, they have an abundance of scoring already. There's no shortage of scoring in Sacramento. If Hart is going to get the minutes in Sac over Terrence Davis, it's because defensively he can hold up that position.
Yeah, he's an above average defender. Like that, he's not a negative defender out there on the court. When he's going against wings, he struggles a little bit. He's slightly undersized at 6'5" for that position, which means the opponent's going to have an advantage against him. When you're trying to throw him on Kevin Durant, on LeBron James, those guys, he's going to get demolished. But as you mentioned, it's kind of about backup wings, right? Backup threes. And I think that's an area where he'll do fine. And I think that's kind of the ideal role for him, coming off the bench, kind of handling some of those spot minutes. Like I don't really see him as a starter in the league. And so if you're kind of filling him into that role, yeah, I think he's going to be fine. And he's going to give you enough where you can play with a little bit more flexibility. Maybe you go small, or maybe you go with pure shooting in the backcourt when he's out there because you don't need some rebounding from your guard positions, because he's capable of grabbing so many of those rebounds and kind of eating them up. So I think he does fine kind of in that kind of role. If you put him where you know what his limitations are, you put him in a position to succeed.
So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm already not very intrigued by this. I do like the idea of Josh Hart, the player. I just don't know necessarily if a Buddy Hield, Josh Hart sign and trade is the best route for the Kings to go. It seems like plan D or E, honestly, more than A, B, and C. And that's before the complications of how this would work under the salary cap. We were talking before we started recording, and you were laying out everything that has to happen because of this Devontae Graham contract that the Pelicans just signed. It makes things a lot more complex. The Kings aren't going to want to pay Hart $22 million, around the range of money that they're paying Buddy Hield. But in order for this to work for both teams, basically, the Kings would have to take back as much money as they're sending out. So it's not like they're freeing up cap space by moving on from Buddy Hield. Can you, in the best way possible, explain what has to happen for this trade to go down between these two teams?
Yeah, this one is complex, and the Kings aren't going to create any flexibility, at least for this season, or potentially longer too, right? Depending on some of the contracts that they take back in a sign and trade scenario. Since they're both kind of operating as over the cap teams, you got to bring back money equal to what you're sending out. Where it gets tricky is the situation with Josh Hart. Let's call Buddy Hield, $24 million, just kind of a nice round number here for that. If you give Josh Hart, say, a $12 million per season contract, that first year's $12 million, it seems about right, maybe a little high, but kind of about right, because it's such a big raise from what he was making before. This phrase from the CBA called base year compensation comes into play, which basically means the Pelicans' outgoing salary is half of what his contract is. So if you offer him $12 million for the Buddy Hield trade to match that $24 million, Pelicans are only getting $6 million of that from a Josh Hart contract, meaning you got to throw in a bunch of other guys. There's Tomas Satoransky that was just acquired from the Chicago Bulls in the sign-in trade for Lonzo Ball. He can get added in. I think he's at like 10. So now you're at 16 of 24. So you need to add some other players into this too to kind of make that money work. Satoransky's an expiring deal. You can get it done. The other thing, though, is this is where this gets so complicated, right? Because they just completed that trade with the Chicago Bulls and it's official. They now have to wait before they can retrade Satoransky. Normally in an offseason, that is 2 months. That pushes us right up to the start of the regular season. I believe it's 19 days this year because of the shortened offseason, so you can get this done before the regular season starts. But you got to do this trade, kind of somewhat soon, right? Or at least kind of agree to it in theory, and it wouldn't go through for 2 more weeks or so. Things can change in the meantime. That's a long time to wait. Teams are starting their preparation for the offseason. You probably want Josh Hart in there as soon as possible. It's this whole big confusing thing that probably means it's not going to actually get done. But again, I see the fit for the Pelicans and why they would want to do this. I don't see it, though. I'm with you from the Kings side. Then you add the complications on top of it.
Yeah, and we'll end with this. That's perfect because I agree completely, even though I do know that there are Kings fans here that are interested. And actually, like I said earlier, I don't think the Kings would turn their nose up at the idea of Josh Hart on this roster, even with their abundance of guards. He provides some things that the Kings are honestly looking for. But the complexities of this deal, plus the need for shooting, or at least the perception of the need for shooting in New Orleans, makes me think that the Kings naturally haven't. This new front office typically doesn't leak things. So I'm not going to ask you to guess where this came from, whether it came from agents or whoever. But this seems like a deal that it makes the most sense if the Pelicans were the one picking up the phone, going to Sacramento and saying, hey, we still want Buddy Hield. We want to work something out here. We know the Lakers deal fell through. We'll start with Josh Hart. Let's make this work. That's my sense on this situation. And maybe the Kings are listening and potentially discussing it, but it seems very unlikely.
Yeah, no, it probably came from that direction. This probably came from the Pelicans, maybe also trying to drum up some interest in a Josh Hart sign and trade in other areas that they could send him out. Maybe it's the Cavaliers who've been linked to him in something for like Larry Nance Jr. or what have you. And look, there's not many contracts New Orleans can send out that match Buddy Hield. So and there's got to be an incentive, right, for the Kings. Is that Josh Hart? Probably not.
Yeah. Well, Jake Madison, I appreciate the insight. I appreciate all the information that you could provide. Of course, if this trade or a similar trade does go down, we'll reconvene to talk about it. I appreciate all that you do, my man. If anybody has any questions about what's going on with the New Orleans Pelicans at any time, Locked On Pelicans is the absolute best resource out there for you. Jake, I appreciate you. We'll do it again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, Matt.